The Panos Skordi Encounter.
Welcome to part 2 on tackling challenges surrounding the FM exam. Hi, James.
Hello.
Let's look at how to prepare for the exam now. Does it involve a lot of calculus?
Well, I like to say that you can pass exam FM without knowing any calculus at all. Now, it's not recommended, but it's certainly possible, unless somehow you got a lot of, by random chance, you got a lot of questions that involved calculus, but I don't think you would. Thankfully, most of the calculus required for FM is very basic. It's very basic integrals or very basic derivatives, and it's a lot of the same ones. Like, can you take the derivative of an exponential? Can you integrate an exponential? And so it can really be learned or refreshed. Hopefully most people taking FM have had some form of calculus beforehand. So I wouldn't be concerned at all if you're rusty on calculus and you're wanting to prepare for FM. Now, you're definitely going to want a lot more calculus for P, but hopefully whatever study materials you're using, like I know both in our P and FM courses at the Infinite Actuary, we offer refreshers on all the calculus that you're going to need for those exams.
So what other skills does a student need to pass the FM exam?
Well, I would say the two primary skills necessary to pass FM are problem-solving skills, which you'll develop by working a lot of problems, and calculator skills, which hopefully whatever material you're using to learn will incorporate the calculator a lot. Because as I mentioned in part 1 of this series, is that mastering your calculator is really one of the keys to passing FM. And so I would say those two skills, and I'll just add another skill that's more generic that really applies to all of the actuarial exams and obviously beyond actuarial exams. And that is being able to stay on task, which gets harder and harder in today's world of distractions. And like back when I took the exam, we didn't have these things in our pockets with Twitter and Reddit and all that stuff. So being able to schedule out when you're going to study and stay focused during those study times so that you can actually tackle these mountains of exams. FM is actually pretty small relative to some of the later exams. I'm not trying to scare people off, but it's kind of good that they start small because they only get harder after the first two. So it's good chance to practice your ability to set out a schedule and be able to, spend quality time deep in the material instead of being easily distracted. So obviously a good skill to accomplish anything in life, but certainly necessary to pass actual exams when you're tackling large amounts of material.
Would you say it's best to have a regular routine in terms of study times during the week? If you're a student and you're a full-time student, or you're a student and you're working and taking the actuarial exams, do you think you should set out your week and ahead of time, plan your week as to when you're going to actually study?
Great question. I've done a lot of research on this, and I've read differing reports, but I'll tell you what definitely worked for me is I think most people are this way. They have some time of day during the day where they are able to focus more. Now, for me, that's very early in the morning. So back when I studied for actuarial exams, what I would do is I would usually start studying at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. just because, no one else is awake. No one else is doing anything. So there are no distractions at all. And maybe, it's less likely to be distracted on these devices too. People aren't sending you direct messages and stuff at 5 a.m. For someone else, it might be, 2 a.m. or 11 p.m. or something. So I would say try to study, and maybe you already know by now, but if you don't, try first studying in different times of the day and kind of rate yourself each time afterwards of how effective was my studying. So find the time of day that works best for you. And then whatever days you plan to study during that time at a minimum, because those are going to be your most effective hours. I know that I can get twice as much done from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. than I can from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. The same 2-hour window, I'm going to get much more done from 5 to 7. So when I would be wanting to study, I would definitely want to do that early on. The other benefit of studying early in the morning is that these actual exams can become a real drain on your life. But for me, when I studied I didn't start taking these exams till I was already working, but I would study before work. And if I needed to study more that day, I would study immediately after work. And what that allowed was studying became a part of my work day. So I didn't do a ton of studying at home. I just got to work very early and stayed a little bit later if I needed to. And then that way, once I went home, I was actually home, and, so I could hang out with my wife or do things with my friends. Whereas I think if you don't make it a part of your work day, then it can become a real drag on your social life and outside of work. So that's one benefit of kind of doing it very early in the morning. But that might not work for some other people. And maybe if late at night, then you can still hang out with your wife or your significant other, and then you can study late at night when everyone else is asleep. So I definitely think having a detailed time, a detailed schedule of when you plan to study is really great too, because then you can plan things ahead of time. Like if I know every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday I study from this time to this time, then I can know I don't need to schedule anything else during those times.
I think I am going to ask you a question. It's a little bit based on what you've just been answering right here, but do you think you should have a detailed study plan, not just on a weekly basis, but leading up all the way through to your exam? So you've actually planned it all out all the way to the exam, and maybe have some sort of contingency in there as well.
Absolutely. I think that is one of the first. I like to think of studying for this exam in 4 steps. The first step is to make a schedule, because, I think the old saying is those that don't plan to fail, basically, or something like that. And these things have a deadline, the exam date, and there's a lot of material. So if you're just like, I'm going to start and just study on certain days, well, maybe you're not studying enough. How do you know if you don't have a schedule ahead of time that you need to finish all this stuff by? And secondly, really, the rest of the process then is learn the material and practice problems, and then practice your exam taking strategy. So actually, you don't even have the entire time to just learn the material, because you need to spend a lot of time practicing problems. It's not enough to be able to work the problems. It's not enough to be able to work the problems, because you have to be able to work the problems in 5 minutes, right? So if you just learn the material and it takes you 10 minutes to work the problems, that's not going to work, because you're not going to be able to get enough problems right if it takes you 10 minutes. So what I do is you look at all the material that you need to cover, and I would say, well, I talk about it in terms of lessons, because I have an online video where each lesson is broken down, and so we actually have in our materials where it schedules out. You tell the day that you're starting, you select your exam date, and then you select how much time you want to have to just work problems, and then it takes all the material that you need to learn and it breaks it down into what you need to do each study day. So you need to plan out that first process of learning the material. So like, let's say you're going to take 2 months to prepare for exam FM, which is pretty typical. So the first month, you're going to learn all the material. So if you're using something like an online seminar, then you would take all your lessons and divide them up into your study days. If you're using the textbook, you would take all the chapters and divide up, okay, I need to do chapter 1 this week, chapter 2 this week, chapter 3 this week, and so on and so forth, so that you finish that. So you really have 2 deadlines. Your first deadline is learning the material, and then your second deadline is taking the exam. And it's really important. Sometimes students, they creep out and they let that learning the material take too long, and they don't have enough time to work problems at the end. That is a huge mistake, a huge mistake. You need to keep pushing through. Even if you're struggling a little bit learning the material, FM is an exam that builds on itself, right? So even if you're not 100% clear on something early on, you're still continuing to use that as you go on to separate, to later parts of material, so that earlier part will become more clear to you. So it's very important that you move on. You have to move on even if you're struggling. So then once you finish that, then you need to work a ton of problems. So then you need to say, how many problems do I have available to me? And the more, the better. Like, for our courses, we're offering at least 1,000 problems for you to practice on. That's in addition to the sample exams that you have at the end. So it's a lot of problems to work. So you need to work a lot of problems each day. And so again, you're going to want to plan out, I need to do 75 problems, 50 problems every day or whatever. And it's extremely important. It's probably the most overlooked step is setting out a good game plan. Because if you don't, there's just too much material. And as I said, in the later exams, you only get more and more material. So use FM and P as your tester for how you do things, because you're going to need to be even more prepared to do that type of stuff for later exams.
That's something that I made, it delayed me going through the exams because I wasn't planned out and I was spending too much time on the material, not enough time on the questions. That's absolutely fantastic advice that you're giving right there. In general, how much time do you think a typical student will spend on studying the material, doing past questions in preparation for the exam?
Yeah, so typical student, I think, is the key word there, because it can vary wildly from one student to the next. But I would say like the average typical student for FM takes about 2 months to 3 months to prepare. Now, of course, how much time you have during those 2 to 3 months is what really matters. And so I'd say most students spend somewhere around 100 to 250 hours studying for FM. So 100 being, someone that maybe has taken a financial mathematics class in the past, or someone that's just super smart. And then so like a more average or typical student may be more like around the 200-hour mark. And I think for FM, you probably want a pretty even split between learning the material and working problems. I would say that if that's your first time taking it. Now, if you're retaking it, then you probably don't need to spend quite as much time learning the material, and maybe more time just working problems to make sure that you get those answers right on exam day. So just to summarize, I would say 2 to 3 months, around 200 hours, and about an even split between learning the material. And I always like to say that you need at least 1 month before you need to be done learning the material, at a minimum of 1 month before the actual exam.
So do you have like any other tips or advice you can give students on successfully navigating exam FM?
Yeah, so I said earlier that the most overlooked thing is like building out a schedule. The other thing that I think where prepared students, in other words, students that I feel like they know enough and they're fast enough at working problems, but they still don't pass the exam. So those like borderline students that some make a 5 and some make a 6, is they overlook exam strategy. I think exam strategy is very overlooked for those students that are kind of right in between. And the key is that on FM, all the questions are worth the same. They're just counting the number of questions that you got right? So we're trying to get 70% of the questions right. That means getting the hardest problem on the exam right is worth the exact same as getting the easiest problem right on the exam. And so that means that your exam taking strategy should take that into consideration. I like to take back to the first actual exam I took. Thankfully, I made this mistake early on and was able to recover from it and actually pass the exam, but I almost didn't. The first exam that I took, the very first question was a hard question, and I sat there for like 15 minutes trying to work this problem. I worked it like 3 times, and I needed to spend like 6 minutes working the problem. And what that meant was I probably didn't even get the problem right, and it gave me that much less time on every single problem that I worked there after that. So it was the worst mistake that you can make. You spend all your quality time working a problem that you're probably not going to get right at all anyways. And what we'd like to do is start with the problems that we're going to get right. Especially early, I feel like in a 3-hour exam, your first hour, you're probably more productive than your last hour because you're a little bit more tired in your last hour. So that's why I now teach my students, and I kind of use this towards the end of my exam process, using what I call a triage strategy. And so what you're going to do is, as you read each problem, you're going to ask yourself a couple of questions. First of all, like, do I know how to work this problem? Right? So that's the most simple thing, because most likely on a 35 question for most students, there's going to be at least 1 or 2 problems that they don't know how to do, or they're just a little fuzzy on. So it's hard for students to just skip those early on, especially if it's a little bit fuzzy. But that's what you need to do. So the question is, do I know how to work this problem? If the answer is no, I don't know how to work this problem, that's what I call a level 3 problem. In other words, I'm going to work those problems last. That's level 3. So the next question is, can I solve this problem in 5 minutes? Now, this is a harder question to ask, and it doesn't have to be, I can solve this one in 4 minutes and 50 seconds, or I can solve this in 5 minutes and 10 seconds. It doesn't have to be that precise, but basically like, do I see a path to the solution? Like I know I need to calculate the interest rate, and then I use the interest rate to calculate the present value of these cash flows, which I'll do using the financial keys on my calculator. Well, I just described that very easily. So yes, we can do that in 5 minutes. So if the answer to that is yes, that's what I call a level 1 problem. And then if the answer is no, I call it a level 2 problem. So it's going to take me longer than 5 minutes, but I do know how to do it. Like I had to do 5 steps, and I just think there's no way I can do these in 5 minutes. So as I'm doing this through my first pass of the exam, I'm just working the level 1 problems. Which means I'm starting by working the problems that I know how to do the best, that I can do the fastest. And so hopefully I won't make any careless mistakes on those, and I can get myself a solid base. So like, let's say that we'll just pretend like there are no pilot questions. So that's 35 questions times 70% is 24.5. So let's say we're trying to get 25 questions right. Hopefully, as I go through this first pass of the exam, maybe I get like 20 questions of level 1 right. So now I only need 5 more questions. So now I go back and I work all the level 2 problems, those that I know how to work, but were probably going to take me longer than 5 minutes. And maybe brain is really weird. It can like subconsciously be working on problems that you read previously while you're working other problems. I know this used to happen to me all the time. Like, you know, you're walking home from an exam, you're like, oh, that's what they were talking about. So you might find that when you go back and work those level 2 problems, that you're actually thought of a faster way to do them. And so now you can work those. So then only after you're done with the level 2 problems do you work the level 3 problems, which are the ones you're probably not going to get right anyways. So that those 2 or 3 problems which you didn't understand, or you didn't see the trick that the problem was asking for. And so I think using this type of strategy will really focus your efforts on the problems that you actually know how to do, and increase the score that you end up with, without actually increasing your knowledge of the material or your ability to work problems at all. So you need to play around with those things. And that's the purpose of taking sample exams. Now, I know there's some people out there that they like to take like 20 sample exams for FM or P or whatever. I don't agree with that, because I viewed in that like 3 steps: learn the material, practice working problems, which get you up to exam or to problem taking speed, where you can work problems in 5 minutes. And then the purpose of sample exams is to work the problems is to, practice your exam taking strategy, which is what I was talking about here. Sorry, I rambled on a lot about that one.
That's some good information. That's really great information. In fact, that came through right there. Thanks, James. That is fantastic information. James' contact details will be included in the description. This is your host, Panos Skordi, on the Panos Skordi Encounter. Take care wherever you are.